Hello and welcome to the next instalment of our Market Reports podcast series. We're about to publish Global Print. Join with Smyth to discuss some of the trends that we're seeing in the market. Sean, can you kick us off by explaining why the global print market is interesting and sort of important for us at the moment?
Why is the global print market important? Well, it's important because it's a significant global market, and the players are extremely keen to find out which parts of the market, what applications, what print processes, which regions are likely to be doing well, therefore where they should be focusing their efforts on developing, selling equipment, substrates, inks, machinery, and other things. It's a flagship report for Smithers. We've been doing it for rather more times than I care to remember, and we tend to get very good feedback on the trends that we identify, and some of the areas where there are opportunities for printing companies and players across the supply chain to focus their marketing efforts.
And where do you see those key opportunities being? What do they sort of look like to you, sort of the top three?
The top three, well, in broad terms, printed packaging is the engine of growth for the overall print market. It has been for many years. It's increasingly important in terms of the value of the output. Part of that is down to the value of the substrates, the board, metal, glass, plastics, and flexibles and corrugate. But also more and more companies are looking at opportunities within the label and packaging space as their traditional markets in graphical print, in publication particularly, where the volumes and values are declining and continuing their decline across many years. In looking at the types of printing, the methods of doing it, digital is performing generally better than the analog alternatives, with the exception of flexo, because flexo is so widely used in print in Europe and North America, and increasingly in Asia, where it's a real competitor to the gravure heartlands of that part of the world.
Excellent. And what sort of trends are we seeing that are pushing these opportunities or shaping these opportunities?
Well, fortunately, in oh so many ways, the impacts of COVID have now broadly played out. They've accelerated some things. They've made some markets change significantly. The acceleration of the trend towards the digital away from analog transformation of print manufacturing. But in 2023, the key word is sustainability. How everybody can minimize their impacts on the environment. And there's a lot of extremely interesting things happening in the way that print is manufactured, in the ordering patterns of print. So instead of filling warehouses full of product that may or may not sell, people are now moving towards more agile supply chains, eliminating inventory wherever they can, and becoming more relevant and more flexible to changing demands of order patterns. And that can be for everything from the magazine and newspaper and catalogue side, through security, graphic printing, marketing collateral, selling things, and importantly in packaging. And in packaging, as we know, the spectre of empty shelves in supermarkets and even in the e-commerce supply chains are unacceptable to brands, unacceptable to retailers, and they are really focusing on more efficient, more robust, and more responsive supply chains. And those have significant impacts on the printing of packaging and other goods and services that involve print.
Excellent, thank you very much. So in terms of the technical innovations that we're seeing in this industry, what's driving us in that sense?
Well, I suppose we've seen the arrival of digital printing many years ago, and over the past few years the really radical change has been the growth in automation, the growth in workflow, to better drive and take out cost in the administration and the selling processes of print and printed packaging, and that will continue. 2024 is Drupa year. We know there are going to be some significant announcements from players, but I see those rather more as incremental advantages. We're seeing quality of inkjet. It's acceptable for 99% of all printed items, and that means that the cost of manufacture, the total cost of ownership of inkjet, is important, and as that falls, we see inkjet moving into more and more applications and taking more share digital. The analog guys aren't standing still. There's an awful lot of automation. Part of that automation is to meet the difficulties that many print companies have in attracting and retaining staff and the skills necessary to produce the wonderful range of materials that the manufacturers produce. So I would say it's looking at automation, looking at controllable processes, and redesigning them, re-engineering them to take time and cost out of the manufacturing cycles.
That's really interesting. So in terms of automation and how it affects companies and people, what do you see that being? Do you see a reduction in the amount of people that we see working in the print industry, print market?
Well, there have been significant declines in the number of personnel categorized as print workers. But what you see is there are the normal mergers and acquisitions, the normal business failures have been accelerated with the impacts of COVID, where we saw significant drops in print manufacturing volumes, and those have broadly played out now. But what we're seeing is in the actual production of print, machines are becoming autonomous. They're using AI, they're using machine learning to handle many of the tasks previously under the control of an experienced and skilled printer or journeyman in the bindery and finishing. And machines can do more and more. And so as a necessary impact of that, there are fewer bodies demanded. You've seen it in pre-press, where if you have to produce a plate or a cylinder and then mount those plates onto a press or onto a sleeve, in the case of flexo, digital printing doesn't need that. So a lot of those roles have changed, but it's not necessarily a downward trend in the number of people, because companies that are successful are finding they're redeploying people, or they're taking people with different skills to develop workflow, to develop web to print, and different methods of marketing, promoting, capturing work. And then when they get that work, organizing it in a much more efficient manner than historically we had to do, with the serial nature of taking one job and controlling it throughout the print supply chain. There's some very interesting cases, and we'll be focusing on it in the technology chapter, of re-engineering print workflows. And they're being done because of the developments in artificial intelligence, in the developments in workflow, enables people to do the same things, but in a more efficient, different way. So yes, I would say it's a continuation of change rather than a necessary decline. But it's difficult to get manual labour, willing to work on a 24-hour shift pattern. So people are doing the same things in different ways and using automation to accomplish those gains rather than manual labour. That's certainly the case in many of the what I would call the technologically developed regions of print. There are still some areas in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, Africa, some parts of Eastern Europe, where labour costs aren't such an important part of the overall cost of the print, and labour is still widely used in those areas. But the interesting thing is that with the modern equipment used in new ways, allows high-geared Western companies to compete on cost against some of the low labour areas, and that's a trend that's going to change. And it also means that they can be more responsive to their customers as well, rather than importing large volumes from low labour regions.
So you mentioned change there quite a lot. How are we seeing regulations impacting the printing industry? Obviously, if we consider packaging, sustainability is a huge thing that we're trying to accommodate and change to adapt. How is print doing the same or similar or different?
Well, as I mentioned, packaging printing is part of an increasingly important part of the market, and there are definite trends of increasing regulation coming across to have a more sustainable, less impactful supply chain. And those impacts are happening in general print. But ultimately, they come because end consumers, people that use, buy, and live with printed items, are changing what they want. And the regulations from local, regional governments follow those. Many brands are taking the lead in these areas and are working toward sustainability goals in 2025, in 2030. And I think it's the understanding of the consumers rewarding brands and retailers who take sustainability seriously. It's obviously being led in some parts of Europe. In Germany, it's probably more relevant than in some parts of Southern Europe. In the North America, California has a reputation for more of those things. But we think it's going to happen globally. It'll take time in some of the regions, but the sustainability requirements, both from legislators, but probably more important from brands as they respond to their customer demands, is seeing significant changes. And one of the interesting things is going to be that you will see in a few years' time, it's not just the price of the print job, it's not just the delivery date, but it's also the carbon balance. It's also the environmental impact. And as technology develops, we're seeing workflows enabling manufacturing to be conducted in multiple locations at the same time to minimize the end delivery impacts. And people are looking at this in a much more holistic, sustainable way, and are seeing that technology is offering solutions that are not immediately apparent, that can reduce unused print. And that's one of the reasons for the demand falls in some markets, is people are just not making these things speculatively in the hope that they might sell them or might use them. They're only manufacturing what they need now, because the manufacturing allows them to do this and give low unit costs on relatively small runs. So there's a lot of factors and a lot of trends going through that. Net result, the way print is being manufactured is continuing to change, as it has done over the past however many hundred years since someone first thought of doing some printing.
Thank you for your time, Sean. The Future of Global Printing will be available at the end of December for purchase.